right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Chamber Business Zoom this morning. An ongoing series that thank you to Los Alamos National Labs is sponsored, and you will all be receiving a gift card voucher for $10 to one of our wonderful local restaurants, thanks to them. We do hope next month to do a hybrid meeting where we go ahead and start having folks that are comfortable with it meet in person, and those that aren't can join in by Zoom. As you all know, the Chamber Business Breakfasts traditionally take place at UNM Los Alamos campus, but until fall, we don't have that as an option. So we're looking to probably do this first one over at Project Y CoWorkspace. So look for more information coming out about that soon. I want to just introduce today's topic. We'll be talking about the downtown pedestrian retail zone, and we want to just have a conversation about it. There's been a lot of talk in the community about this proposed ordinance, and so we just want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to discuss it. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn this over to Patrick Sullivan. Patrick.
Okay, thanks, Ren. So I'll kind of, I think what we want to do today is just let people kind of express their thoughts and opinions on this. Maybe I'll kind of kick it off with trying to reiterate the position LACDC has taken on this. There were some, I think, some confusion out there with some statements made in the media about our position that I don't believe are accurate. So what we're advocating for here, this proposed pedestrian overlay would be a very significant change to the way zoning is done in our downtown. And because of that, because it's such a significant change, our position would be not to immediately take this forward for kind of formal approval or denial of creation of this overlay, which is going to happen. June 9th, I believe this is going to Planning and Zoning Commission for approval or denial of this. But our position is that this deserves a lot of thought and discussion and analysis rather than going straight into an approval or denial process. And with that being said, there is a consultant under contract with the county already that is doing a complete review of the development code and will come out with a series of recommendations on how to change and improve the development code. And our position is that we feel that this would better be kind of discussed and analyzed through that process, so that there's a thorough understanding of what all of the intended and unintended impacts may be. Kind of a look at where ordinances like this have worked and why they've worked, or where they've failed and why they've failed, and what the positive outcomes or negative outcomes of something like this has been. The process that's going through now, I don't believe allows for the same level of input and discussion. That's one of the reasons that we're holding meetings like this. A planning and zoning hearing or a county council meeting allows for people to make public comment, but there's not the opportunity for discussion and a give and take and an exchange of ideas. You kind of make a statement and then the next person gets up and makes a statement. So that's really what we're trying to do here, is to allow people to have a chance to kind of talk about their concerns, talk about why they feel this is a good idea, not a good idea, and kind of go from there. So with that, we'll kind of step back and Ren and I will kind of help moderate and just ask people to kind of raise their hands and ask a question or make a comment or a statement, and we'll kind of go around. If you know how to use the raise your hand function down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little icon that'll show up that says reactions, and if you hit that, there's a button there to say raise your hand. If you don't see that, just go ahead and wave if you have your camera on, and we'll try to go around and make sure everyone gets a chance to speak.
Thanks, Patrick. Does anybody want to start this off?
I just want to say that you actually go to the participants area at the bottom, and then the raise hand is a button at the end of that section, not under reactions.
Okay.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Let's see. Anybody that wants to jump in? There's Shannon. Shannon, go right ahead.
I'll go ahead and start out. I'm probably like several other people who are in this meeting, still a little bit stunned that so much time and energy is being focused on an idea that hasn't been vetted. That concerns me. And I hope that the council folks that brought it up will learn from this experience, because I believe it was 2 council members, but I'm not sure, that this was their idea. And I'd love to see them lay out what they did prior to this to come to the decision that this was something they should bring to the council, because now energy that could be spent on tourism, economic development, a host of other ideas is going to be spent on this one idea, whether supporting or opposing or investigating. And this is not an idea that, that I would have ever considered bringing forward as a strong idea for business, partly because I have some vested interest in this. But I've been talking to a lot of people lately. I went back through my potential tenants list of retail folks that I talked to over the past 6 years, and none of them are planning on opening a retail venue anywhere, much less in Los Alamos. And their concerns about Los Alamos were a trade area, but they weren't rent, they weren't anything else. They said, I'm just not able at this time to expend the energy to do that and risk. But I do know that office people support the restaurants, support the banks, support any small businesses we do have in town. So a mix is healthy. And to have a segregated first and second floor makes no sense. But my main concern is the energy that we're expending on this without having done really significant due diligence prior to bringing it to this level. I would love to spend my energy elsewhere. Thanks.
Thanks, Shannon. Anybody else?
So I have some questions that came in via email. And I'll get to those. Maybe Philip will come to you next, but maybe just for folks on here, I realized we didn't quite go through an explanation of what this ordinance does. So maybe let me take 30 seconds to do that, and then Philip will come to you, and then Diana, I have your questions here in front of me as well. What the proposed ordinance would do is create an overlay district that could be used over the downtown area. That's the intent. That would effectively ban offices from occupying the ground floor of any space within the overlay district. And so that's the intent of it. And the intent, I think, is to help catalyze retail and restaurant development and occupancy within the kind of pedestrian walking area in the downtown. So that's what this overlay would do. Existing buildings and existing uses would be grandfathered in. The way the ordinance or the amendment to the existing code is written, it would require a space to be vacant for 12 months before it is required to come into compliance with this overlay. Another trigger that would cause compliance is if a property owner made improvements to their space or to their property that totaled more than 25% of the appraised value. Now that part of that clause actually exists today, that if a property owner does that, their building must come into compliance with code and that type of thing. It would also trigger compliance with this overlay as well. So that's what we're talking about here today. And Philip, we'll go ahead and go to you next.
Well, first of all, I agree with your comments initially that this is not being properly analyzed or understood. And I also agree with what Shannon said. It's a diversion of resources and time. And I think there is, I think there needs to be more respect for the work of the county staff and the processes that they've undertaken. I think they understand the town and the problems perhaps better than the council does. And in any case, they have a methodical process going on to try and improve the zoning ordinances. And that should be respected and allowed to take its course. I also personally feel it's a wrong approach. The problems that are in, and I've dealt with retail tenants over the past 10 years, and I've done my best to encourage and support them. The problems faced by retail in Los Alamos has to do with, and these have been brought up before, the scarcity of employees, the inadequacy of the population base, and now online shopping has had a huge impact. And this kind of coercive approach, which is in effect, let's remove options from the landlords. Let's sort of constrain property ownership, and there is exactly the wrong approach in my mind. And that the county has so many other positive tools at its disposal in terms of incentives, in terms of investment in the downtown space. What you want a downtown that is attractive to investors and to bring in resources and creativity. I mean, the idea is to produce economic results by regulation rather than incentive is, I think, just a very negative and short-sighted approach to revitalizing the downtown. And those incentives can be provided to the retail businesses themselves, and support, direct support. I know there are legal constraints to what the county can do, but they have also found creative ways around that. I mean, there were a lot of incentives for the development of the new Smiths complex. And so there are positive ways to support retailers. And this, in my mind, is a negative and ill-conceived way of doing it. And I think we should, we should let the experts understand and analyze what the options are. So that's essentially my view of it. It's understated, perhaps, but I think this is a very damaging and ill-conceived idea.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Let me come to some questions that were emailed to me. The first question is, do we know from other recent business closures such as Bell's, Uli's, CB Fox, what were the contributing factors to their decisions to close? So CB Fox, yes, that's been very public. The Fox family decided to retire and to exit out of the retail business. That was a personal family decision on their behalf. Bell's was a result of the parent company of that brand of stores being bought by another company, and that company deciding to close the Bell's brand and close down those locations. So that is a national corporate decision that took place there. Uli's, I have not spoken to the owner of Uli's, so I can't speak to that. I don't know, Ren or Lauren, if either one of you spoke to her directly.
So my understanding, Patrick, was that she kind of focused more on her Santa Fe location.
Okay. So those were the three mentioned in the question. The second question is, will existing businesses be grandfathered in so that offices can remain? And I touched on that earlier. Yes, the way the ordinance is written currently, a location has to be vacant for more than 12 months, or an improvement to the property has to be made before compliance is required with this overlay. So there's some question there, I guess, in my mind on, whether some of the locations that would be ideal retail locations that perhaps are not retail now would ever stay vacant for more than the 12 months, especially some of the smaller locations. The third question is not such a proposal creating a capital burden on existing landlords and business owners who might want to remodel or expand? I won't speak for a landlord, but like, as I said before, the 25% of appraised value clause already exists today to trigger compliance for code, if I'm stating that correctly. But this would be one other compliance trigger that would be added on to that. And let's see, the last question here is, how can the county assist businesses in accessing LEDA funds for capital improvement? So that's a good question. LEDA traditionally, which is the Local Economic Development Act, is kind of the main mechanism that allows for legal participation by a municipality with a private business. And it is not in conflict with the anti-donation clause. Traditionally and historically, LEDA has not been available to retail. That changed about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was for communities under 10,000, and then I think it was raised to 25,000. But then there was a clause added that it could only go to retail if it was not directly in competition with existing retail in the community. During the past legislative session this January and February, the rules for LEDA kind of changed again. It's a bit confusing, and so I'm not clear exactly what the changes are. We're waiting for kind of official guidance from the state to come out. Once they have that solidified and the new guidance for LEDA is out, we'll be sure to take a look at that and get that information out to folks so that we can fully understand how LEDA can be applied to help our existing businesses here in town or potentially new businesses that would like to start. So that's something that I think is kind of TBD. It should be out before July 1st, which is when the new parts of the LEDA bill will take effect. So I hope that answered your questions, Diana. Looks like there's a question that came in from John Courtwright in the chat. Did we read the proposal correctly that medical offices would be allowed on the ground floor? Yes, I believe that is correct. Would dental offices, spas, etc. be allowed? I would assume dental would be considered medical. A question about a spa or massage therapy or chiropractic, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. So that's something that I think would need to be discussed, and we need to get some clarification on.
Well, this is
Does anyone
Roger.
else have, Roger, would you like to say something?
Sure. This is Roger Waterman. My family has a vested interest in this sort of thing as well, and has had for a long time. We've had retail tenants, but if you pay attention to what's happening in the world, retail is a non-starter for most developers and for most retailers. There's lots of examples: Sears, Kmart, Macy's, Tiffany's, all of these Blockbuster, all of these were huge retail outlets. and they found that they couldn't compete. You know, there's three major things for successful retail: dollars per square foot in sales, cost of goods vis-a-vis sales, and traffic through the door. Those things are what determines success. Rent is a piece of it. Payroll is a piece of it. There are retailers that have been successful even with a marginal location in this town. Pangea is one. There are retailers that have been successful but found that they could no longer compete. Ottawa Bookstores was next to the museum, was a wonderful retail outlet, and found that they couldn't compete. Now, I don't know about other landlords. I don't keep track of rates or charges, but we try to give the retailers as good a rate as we can, because we want them to be successful. There's nothing to be gained from a landlord of having a transition in tenants. It doesn't do anyone any good. And by the time you make the TI, the tenant improvements, and then you take out the tenant improvements and you start over again, it doesn't pay to have a failure in your real estate, no matter who it is. Failures cost a lot of money. I think this indicates that someone isn't paying attention to the news and what's happening to the world. And you can't legislate success. You can help, but you can't legislate it. And if we do, we're going to end up hurting all the things that have made this country strong. So the county has got a lot of resources that the private sector doesn't have, and that's fine. This is a government town. It always has been. We have the wonderful blessing of an entity that is important to us, important to the nation, and important to the world. And it hasn't been compromised by the latest crisis. So as a landlord here, I still count my blessings, and I think what the county is doing downtown is the right approach. Making your town attractive is the best thing for pedestrian traffic, and landscaping is the easiest and least expensive way of doing that. And I think they're doing a marvelous job. But there's a limit to what landlords can do for retail. And we've had Ottawa Bookstore, wonderful. We've had successes, but we've had more recently more failures. And I don't think this is the right street to waste our time on. There's a lot of other things that should be consuming a lot more time. Thanks.
Thanks, Roger. I do want to just say, I think it's very important that everyone should make sure that the county council knows your opinion on this. So if you feel strongly about it, you should take a moment and send your comments to the council. Their email address, I'll put it in the chat. It's countycouncil@lacnm.us. And I think everybody should take the time to send those, your feelings to them so that that is out there. I think that's very important. Let's see. Shannon, I think you were up next.
I just have one quick clarification. I've been talking to a lot of people offline from my Facebook feed and from social media, which is not a really great force in Los Alamos. Facebook has spread an awful lot of really awful misconceptions that really hurt people about every industry, from banking to real estate to whatever. But the biggest misconception I'm running into right now is that someone on Facebook had posted that if you pay $17 or $15 a square foot for a 500 square foot office, it costs this many $1,000s a month. What they don't realize is when we quote a $17 a square foot cost to a tenant, that's about on a 500 square foot office or 500 square foot retail facility, that's about $700 a month. And so they've got their numbers inflated because they didn't understand the mathematical computation by which we charge. So there's a misconception in this town that's running pretty deep that there are people that are paying $10, $7, $12, $15,000 a month on a very small office. And that's just not true. And I'd love some help from folks to help dispel that myth, because we're not an overpriced market by any means.
Thank you,
So-
Shannon.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Just for folks that are unaware, as Shannon said, the way prices are quoted here, if someone says it's $15 a square foot, that's on a per year basis. So you take the total square footage times $15, and that's your yearly rent. You divide it by 12 then to get your monthly lease rate. So I believe David was next, and then John.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm mostly here to listen, but the issue of contacting county councilors came up, so I thought I'd share something. My personal perspective is that the best way to communicate with county councilors is interactively. We get a lot of emails, and especially if they're sent to county council at, then you'll probably just get a response from the chair. Acknowledging that you've received it, and certainly we all read it. But if you really want to have an interactive conversation, I would suggest that you have a forum like this, or maybe just a private meeting, and you say, Councilor Israelovitz, we would like to meet with you. We have this constituency that would like to explain to you our circumstances, and find a time, especially now as things are opening up. Or if people are not comfortable, then meet at Ashley Pond. It's turning very beautiful right now, but really find a personal time to meet. If Zoom is second best, telephone is third best, an email is down in the list, and probably the worst or the least effective is to show up at a council meeting and give a 3-minute input, right? Because there we don't respond. So I would really encourage, for this or for any issue, to just our phone numbers are public, our emails are public, and just make a personal. That also shows your commitment that you're willing to spend your time, as well as demanding the county councilor's time, which is part of our job, to have that interactive discussion. So that's what I would encourage, is just reach out to every counselor individually and make your case for this or for anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. We sure appreciate that input. I also want to note that Maura O'Neill mentioned in the chat that she would like to have letters to the editor about topics as well. And now let's go to John Courtwright, who has his hand raised.
Good morning, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity that everybody's putting time into this. And Shannon, I think you said a lot of good things. I hope you've taken my comments on the Facebook as to heart, because I sincerely mean those. If you guys have not read that, the basic comment is that this is the meeting that needs to happen, not so much with the public. And Roger has said it as well as anybody else that does this. We're not so much in the retail end. We have that one office building, and it's been rented to a contractor for the lab. So I'm not as experienced on the retail side of this, but we did have an office building in Albuquerque, and so very well know how hard it is to rent something to somebody that's trying to get their feet wet. And most of the time you end up taking a loss. That was one of the big problems. Everybody wants it a certain way, but they don't want to pay for the remodeling of it, even if it's a paint job. So, and so there's the big hook, is that the public does not understand how much taxes and all that has to go on just to try to maintain that building, and think that we're just have nothing else to do but go out there and paint that building. And I don't think that's explained quite enough to a lot of people. They don't understand what it takes to keep everything up all the time when you don't have renters coming in. So I want to say that that's why we, need a mix of different people and, try to help it. The small business center was meant for that purpose, to try to give some of those people some office space, but retail space would be better. But of course, again, that means store frontage and so forth and so on. So everybody keeps talking those things, but Roger said it all. I'm not going to beat what he said was absolutely true. You're just not going to get retail to come back like it was. But the other important thing is there's a lot of people like myself and the people that run the gas stations, that run the mechanic shops. We're not going to get walk-in traffic. And Village Arts, they're not going to get walk-in traffic. They're going to get people in the town that know they're there. Yet they are a big vital part of this. And Cindy, bless her heart, she's doing this. She has been just put on the back burner so many times that I think the county is, I say this, Paul, directly. I think sometimes we all know about the anti-donation clause and so forth and so on, but there's things that can happen that would help reduce the cost of getting something going and get people motivated to start something. I have no idea why Cindy wants to do what she's doing. She's doing everybody a favor by having her pet store. Again, you're not going to get a walk-in traffic to that pet store. So
You do.
but you do get a few, but that's not her clientele. And don't say it is. The art center is, of course, but that's Ken's Noble thing up by the lodge, not down on DP Road. So I think the other part of that, again, is, we'd love to have some more of those little things that might get some more tourists here to town, but we can't have, without the help of the county sometimes, realizing what it, they do realize some things, and Paul's been helpful, especially, we've been trying to do some things to get, to help the town look better, to help the town, want people to stay home. But that doesn't bring any retail in. So I guess my final comment is that we need more meetings like this to discuss it. And the Chamber Conference meetings were very good before, because then we find out what other business people are saying. But it's not just Dave, it's not just Ken Noble. There's lots of other business people in this that need, to be heard. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Dave Jolly, why don't you go right ahead?
All right, I just wanted to mention a couple of things, because I think, and this is, retail has been in my life for longer than I'd like to think right now, because I don't want to think about how old I've gotten. But I think one of the good things about this is it has brought the discussion to the forefront about what we need to do for retail. And that's a discussion I've been wanting to have for a long time. The unfortunate part is that because of the way this was handled, it's almost become a distraction, because now, instead of thinking about all the ways that we can help our situation, we're all focused on one. And I think that's kind of unfortunate. I wanted to address one of the things that Shannon talked about, and it really is important, misinformation on Facebook, because that's where this battle is being fought, if you want to call it that. And I think it even came up last night at the council work session. There was a comment about a project, the Marriott project that was approved a year or two ago, and that overwhelmingly the public was opposed to that. And that is just simply not true. It's the loud people on Facebook that were overwhelmingly opposed to it. And I think that this gets mixed up. And I did want to say, during one of the discussions on Facebook last week, I did invite one of the proponents of this, not on council, to sit down and talk about the retail situation and what retail is. I think last night it came up again, define exactly what the problem is. And I think Today, we've heard several people mention 2 or 3 different things that are major obstacles to retail, or headwinds at least for retail. I made an offer to discuss that with one of the proponents, and that person said that he would reach out to me. I don't expect that to happen, but I think we need to continue doing that. I think we need to continue to offer, as part of the discussion, to talk about what really are the issues. And I'm not just talking from my experience, but anybody else that operates a retail business in town, or restaurant, or any kind of customer facing business. So they're trying to help, but let's actually talk about what the issues really are. And I can say, for one, and been talking about this for 2 or 3 years now too, it's coming national now, but labor is a serious issue that we fought in Los Alamos for about as long as I've been here. The other thing I wanted to comment on, and I said this has become a distraction, the council listened in the work session last night to talk about a metropolitan redevelopment district in White Rock. And one of the things that came up in that conversation was something I think might actually help us address the situation in Los Alamos as well. And I didn't chime in, but a question was raised for our counselors here about why this hadn't been looked at for Los Alamos. And I can just say, historically, my recollection is when I got here and became involved and was new to all this, MRA was discussed for downtown Los Alamos, except there was a lot of perceived blowback about the fact that you had to use the word blight. And at that time, nobody wanted to associate the word blight with downtown Los Alamos. So I think as political sensitivity took over, and that was never pursued. But the thing that came up last night that really got my attention, maybe more than White Rock, was the idea of the bottom line that we keep hearing from people that this issue, this proposed ordinance is set to address, is the issue of rents being too high for people who go into retail or that kind of business. One of the functions, or one of the examples that Lauren showed, and Amy from Main Street, New Mexico, was the fact that working around the anti-donation clause, there are mechanisms within the MRA to indirectly subsidize rents. And I think one of the examples Amy gave was a building that one community took over or inherited, one or the other, used the MRA district authority to issue an RFP for wanting to support small local businesses, and wound up selling that building for $100. That brought the cost basis of that building down. And then the developer was required through the bidding process and the RFP to pass that savings on to very small businesses in town, which kind of is the thing we keep hearing we want to do here. This proposed ordinance takes that out of the hide of our landlords, as if they're the problem. And I don't think that's the issue. I think that's where we have a distraction here. We don't need to turn one side or the other into the enemy. I'd like to see us work together. And so I'll mention this to Lauren and Patrick directly. We probably need to explore that and see if there's any opportunities for the corridor between Trinity and Central and the roundabout and, say, Oppenheimer or 20th Street, either one, that we may be able to accomplish something there if we just say we're not afraid to use that word anymore. So I just wanted to bring that up today. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, David. And Lauren, I'll make a comment here, and then I know there's a couple of questions in the chat. And Lauren, please chime in if I am not correct in this. But there has been some study on whether an MRA would be appropriate in Los Alamos up here in the downtown. And my understanding is that the set of criteria that determines if you're eligible, we meet some of those, but some of them are kind of questionable whether we would actually meet the threshold of being able to look at putting an MRA in place up here. Is that your understanding, Lauren?
That's correct. Yes. And, we can look at site-specific locations too that might better meet all of the criteria per the state statute for an MRA zone. But the purpose of us pursuing White Rock first was because it does meet all of the criteria. And we worked with New Mexico Main Street to examine it fully through a designation report. So we would have to do that process for Los Alamos as well.
Okay, and Ren, I know there's a question from Maura O'Neill about had there been any chamber members that had reached out directly in support of this. I'll speak, and then Ren, you should as well. I have not had a chamber member reach out to me directly in support of this. I have had business owners in town, who've been in meetings and kind of offline express curiosity about exactly what the impacts would be. And that's kind of the extent that we've seen. And then what we've seen, in meetings like this and in a Main Street Futures meeting last week, where folks, gave their opinions and expressed concerns about it. Ren, would you like to add something to that?
No, I feel like I've had the same experience, people asking questions about it, but not supporting it. We do have a lot of property owners on here, but we also have a few small business owners. Lisa, I was wondering if you would like to comment. You did mention in the chat that you don't think, this will solve things. If you are able, do you want to tell us why you think that? That might be helpful for everyone. She can't right now, she says. So let's see. Does anyone else want to have any input on that?
So I'll just kind of reiterate, what was said last week. We had two small business owners on in a meeting that we held last week on this topic. One of them made the comment that they would always be more supportive of incentivizing the type of development or behavior or occupancy or whatever word you want to use. That would be much more favorable to them than restricting something. And the other small business owner, expressed some concerns in general about, the difficulty doing business here, but stated that the two biggest problems they had come across in their experience here was infrastructure for small business and employee recruitment and retention.
And I'll just add to
and that's
that.
something we hear a lot.
It is.
Go ahead,
I'll-
Lauren.
Yeah, I'll just add to that related to the infrastructure comment. It was brought up that a lot of our downtown properties in particular were originally outfitted as office space. And so that is a problem with the infrastructure right now, looking at loading docks and other infrastructure that's needed for a successful retail business. So that was also brought up. And I think this, to Patrick's point earlier, this has spurred a good discussion about what the true challenges are so that we can help solve them.
And what I hear a lot is kind of a distillation of the challenge of operating a retail business here to a single issue. And typically that's been rent. I would argue that probably the majority of business owners anywhere in the state or in the country would like to have their rent be less than what it is. And I'm not discounting the fact that rent is a concern for folks, but I don't believe that is the paramount ultimate issue. I think we have several factors that have been mentioned here and discussed, whether it's rent as a function of the cost of doing business, whether it's employee attraction and retention, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's population and kind of a lack of a customer base or lack of a sizable enough customer base. I think all of these things together contribute to some of the problems that we're seeing here. And so, I think it deserves more thought and discussion on, how do we address this kind of holistically as opposed to targeting a single issue and trying to force a fix on that.
Shannon asks in the chat, does anybody know what the Los Alamos or national average is for the percent of income in retail or restaurants going for rent?
So I don't have those numbers. We could try to do some research. I know typically, kind of the rule of thumb is, if you're opening a retail, you want your rent to be in line with about 10% of your annual revenue. That rent should be equal to about that. And that's a very general rule of thumb statement. How realistic that is, I think, is a function of where you are in the country and how your market, what your market conditions are.
I don't know how much history is actually useful here, but I'll try to be brief. White Rock is a community of 6,500 people. It was basically developed by Home Planning and Development. Home Planning and Development owned White Rock Builders, and the Smith's store. We wanted to expand their space. It was originally in our shopping center, and we tried to build a new store for them on the corner of Rover and Highway 4, but they decided to go ahead and move to the bankrupt Gibson's on Sherwood. Well, that pretty much emptied our shopping center. So we purchased White Rock Builder Supply as the major tenant, redid our store frontages into retail space, and opened up, let's see, a flower shop, art gallery, a women's clothing store, White Rock Builders Supply. We moved White Rock Builders Supply into that development. Gordon's Tapes and Records started there, and we had a pharmacy. When Smith's opened, the pharmacy went out of business. The flower shop went out of business. This clothing store went out of business. Basically, the mall shut down. And after the White Rock was fully developed, so the Builders Supply wasn't successful. And so even in a small market 20 years ago, competition improved one source of retail satisfaction, meaning a much bigger grocery store, and it closed down a bunch of retailers. The village was no longer successful, and so now it's vacant ground. So it's not just a matter of wishful thinking. It's a matter of investments that go sour. And we've made a lot of mistakes, and we've had some successes, but we tried to force it to we tried to force the situation into success, and it didn't work. So that's just it's historical comment. That was before the internet.
Well, we appreciate that background, and thank you to Diana too for your information. I do want to mention that on June 8th, there is a county council meeting, planning and zoning, that will be discussing this. GPS will be there. So I would encourage all of you to attend that. And Paul, did you want to say anything there?
Yeah, actually June 8th is the county council meeting where we will the Decker Paris Sabatini will be presenting the downtown plan.
Okay.
Their recommendations for the downtown plan. And then June 9th is the planning. And so right now,
Thank you.
An application has been submitted for a text amendment for this item to go to planning and zoning on June 9th. That's the schedule right now. But it just so happens that those kind of coincide that same week. So again, the June 8th meeting is the downtown plan. update the council on their recommendations and strategies. Kind of a parallel yet separate kind of process here.
Okay, thank you. So again, if you have strong feelings about this and want to convey that to the counselors, as Counselor Israelovitz said, reach out directly. As Maura O'Neill said, feel free to send letters to the editor as well.
So, Ren, let me jump in here because I made a statement and I misstated something that I want to clarify for everyone
Okay.
here. When I gave out the number of 10%, the commercial rents by rule of thumb should be about 10% of your gross revenue. I misspoke. What I meant was it should be about 10% of your gross revenue, your sales per square foot. And that's a very different number. So let's take the example of you have a 1,500 square foot shop. You have $300,000 in sales a year. That comes out to about $200 a square foot. 10% of that would be a $20 a square foot kind of lease cost as a rule of thumb of what you should be able to budget towards your rent. And again, that $20 is on a yearly basis.
Okay.
Those were just kind of easy numbers out there. So I wanted to clarify that because it's very different than what I said before. So you're looking
Okay.
at 10% of your sales per square foot.
All right, thank you for that clarification, Patrick. In the chat, Maura O'Neill asks, what does DPS recommend with regard to an overlay? Paul, do you have any input on that? Not sure if he is still actively with us there.
So I know DPS is going through their review and analysis of the code, and here's Paul.
I froze. Sorry, I just came back. I was just
Okay.
about to log back on. So I'm sorry. What was the question to me?
What does DPS recommend with regard to this overlay?
They don't have a recommendation at this point, folks. It's it's some of the conversation that we've had, which hasn't been a lot because we haven't, how should I say this? We just haven't really been offered an opportunity to really weigh in on it.
Okay.
And I would suggest that our approach to the downtown, as far as this process is concerned, is really to present a menu of options as opposed to one very specific thing. And so, and I would say that the menu includes looking at incentives, looking at other ways to approach how we could stimulate retail in the downtown. But I would just suggest the core of our plans have been really to focus on how we can bring more residents downtown, how we can look at incentivizing that piece or supporting that piece from the county's perspective, looking at parking strategies and looking at things like densities and building heights as well. Not a lot of really specific targeted approaches like this, to be honest. It's been discussed. We've received some feedback, and we've had conversations, frankly, over the last year and a half, 2 years, to figure out, is this an approach that one ought to take? And we've not come to any conclusion on this, partly because of all of the comments that have been received here today, and that is the market changing as such. I think a comment that was made was, there's one thing that's really worse than having a block with lots of offices, and it is having a block with a lot of empty storefronts, right? So I think that's really the balance that we're trying to achieve with this, and that's what DPS is going to present on, is to say, this is one tool perhaps, but going back to what David had said, we honestly, we're hoping that this doesn't become a distraction to the overall plan and discussion, because we really are bringing some good concepts we feel very strongly about, and we just don't want them to become sort of occluded.
Sure, okay. Paul, David Jolly also commented, do we know what kind of public outreach planning and zoning will do, or is it just that meeting?
Planning and it's just this meeting for now. That's the
Okay.
plan. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the schedule. That's their role. They don't do public outreach per se. They hold public hearings.
Okay,
That makes any sense.
And Paul, just to clarify, the planning and zoning meeting on June 9th, should the P and Z vote to go ahead and approve the creation of this overlay, then the next step would be that it would go back to county council for final adoption. Is that correct?
Yes, it's right now. Right now, and again, this is sort of an incremental evolutionary process that I'm not quite on top of. I think, but what I understand now is that this is a text amendment. So really, what it's doing is establishing an overlay. We don't have any. I think it's reasonable to assume it's in the downtown, but we don't necessarily know that at this stage. The text amendment, if approved by planning and zoning, would then go to council for final approval. And then the operational assumption here is then part 2 would be then to establish where the district would go, and it would follow the same process.
okay. Thank you. Councilor Israelovitz has his hand raised.
Actually, I lowered it as well. So no, I think that I was going to make a point that that Paul covered subsequently. So sorry about that.
Okay. Can everyone see Lisa's comment? She, I think, made her point down there. Creating more mandates, restrictions for property owners does nothing to help small businesses. Small business retail is in danger nationwide. Pandemic lockdowns were devastating. Thousands of mom and pops closed their doors for good. What bothers her is when the county government push policies that favor big corporations, small businesses lose out. Lisa, thank you for that. Your point is certainly well taken. So our time, we are at 11 o'clock. This went very, very fast. Let's see. Again, Lisa, thank you. She said she can cite specific examples of when the county moved heaven and earth for big corporations. Thank you for that. So we are at 11 o'clock, and that is when this was scheduled to go to. If anybody has any final comments they want to make, please just raise your hand. I do just want to say again, as Councilor Israelovitz pointed out, please reach out to your counselors and make sure they know that you have an opinion about this now. Write your letters to the editor. Roger, your historical perspective was valued, and people are asking for that historical perspective to maybe be put out in an article or letter to the editor. So unless anybody has any last minute comments, I do just want to wrap up. Councilor Rieger pointed out the most important point is that such changes led to a freeze in investment, both in terms of buying and remodeling. And Lisa says thank you. So I do just want to remind you, we will do the next Zoom meeting as a hybrid, both in person and on Zoom. So we hope to, make sure that everybody has a comfort level with that. We will be getting those that information and date out to you. The topic is going to be doing business in Los Alamos. So Maura, thank you for attending and trying to capture this. We appreciate you. And Main Street, LACDC, the Chamber, we are here if you have anything that you want to reach out to us about. But again, just to wrap it up, I encourage you to reach out to your county councilors. And thank you, everyone, for being here. This is an important topic, and we appreciate everyone taking the time to be here today to voice your opinions. Thank you, everybody.
I'd like to just thank LACDC for hosting this meeting and for conducting a very thoughtful discussion. So thank you.
Thanks, Philip. We appreciate that. All right, everyone. Thank you very much and have a great day.